I took electrical engineering at the university, but was much interested.
This is John Bardeen. Bardeen is the only person to ever win a Nobel Prize in physics twice. He's also the most boring person I've ever researched. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's true. There is not a single piece of writing on this guy that does not point out just how uninteresting he was. People don't remember the name John Bardeen. You've got guys like Albert Einstein and Richard Feynman. And over here, you've got rice cakes, warm milk, and John Bardeen. But you know what? I like rice cakes. And I like John Bardeen too. Here's why I like him and why sometimes it's okay to be boring. John Bardeen lived a humble life from start to finish. Bardeen was born in 1908 in Wisconsin. It quickly became clear that John was a child prodigy. By the age of 5, he was solving math problems. By age 9, he skipped 3 grades in school and was taking the same classes as his older sibling. He graduated from high school at age 13. Bardeen was a math wizard. His professor saw this and encouraged him to become a scientist, but John wanted to be an engineer so that he could make money. That's why, in 1928, Bardeen graduated with 2 engineering degrees. He stayed at the University of Wisconsin for 2 years as a research assistant before moving on to the workforce. He followed his favorite professor, Leonard Peters, to Gulf Research Laboratories. While at Gulf, Bardeen invented a new electromagnetic method for prospecting oil. Gulf kept his method as a trade secret for over 50 years. John was smart, but he was bored. Gulf Labs reminded him that his real interest was in studying theoretical concepts of math and physics, rather than the practical applications. He loved toying over abstract concepts, not staring out of his window watching young men drill oil. So, Bardeen left his high-paying job to go back to school. Bardeen chose Princeton University, thinking that he could meet Albert Einstein. But he didn't know that Einstein worked for a department that was completely separate from the grad school. Disappointed but still smart as ever, Bardeen received a PhD in mathematical physics from Princeton in 1936. Now armed with a PhD, more opportunities started opening up for John. Harvard let him into its new postdoc program for more research. He was invited to take part in the Manhattan Project to build the atomic bomb, but turned down the offer. Instead, Bardeen started taking an interest in a little-known phenomenon called superconductivity. He then went to work at the Naval Ordnance Labs and Bell Telephone Laboratories. Bardeen's job at Bell Labs was to get rid of vacuum tubes. AT&T needed to cut costs. Vacuum tubes were expensive, power-intensive, and unreliable. Bell Labs director Mervyn Kelly tasked the team of William Shockley, Walter Brattain, and John Bardeen to come up with a cheap, reusable replacement for the vacuum tubes. Bardeen liked Walter Brattain. Bardeen was adept at analyzing problems and coming up with creative new theories to solve them. Brattain had a knack for scientific experimentation to test those theories. They ended up inventing a solution to the vacuum tube problem, the transistor. While the transistor was a result of Bardeen's ideas, William Shockley took most of the credit. Shockley was more outgoing and eccentric than the reserved Bardeen. On the day that Bardeen and Brattain created the first transistor, Bardeen told his wife, "I think we discovered something today." He was right. It cannot be overstated just how important the invention of the point contact transistor really is. The transistor didn't just replace the vacuum tube, it made portable electronics possible. The jump from these warehouse-sized computers that could do 2 + 2 in an hour to pocketable devices running 3D graphics engines is a direct result of the invention of the transistor and its subsequent iterations. Transistors are the building blocks of modern computers. Modern transistors are networked out of silicon with microscopic precision. A transistor is a semiconductor. A semiconductor is exactly what it sounds like. It conducts halfway between a non-conductive material and a conductive material. By taking a semiconductor material and either adding or removing a single electron, you can manipulate the flow of current to be either positive or negative from a neutral state. By going from neutral to positive or negative, you have basically made a simple machine that generates a 0 or a 1, which is what you need for binary computing. Transistors are like the cells of the computer. The invention was so brilliant that it won Bardeen his first of 2 Nobel Prizes in physics. When he heard the news, Bardeen dropped his frying pan on the floor, scattering scrambled eggs all across the kitchen. Bardeen left Bell Labs shortly after inventing the transistor. He hated working at Bell. In his resignation letter, he states how he tried to get along with Shockley, only to be disrespected by his supervisor and his peers. So Bardeen found a better job instead. John started teaching full-time at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. He shifted his focus from semiconductors to superconductors. Many genius thinkers have tried and failed to figure out superconductivity, including Albert Einstein and Richard Feynman. Bardeen tried and succeeded. He developed a new theory of superconductivity with two of his colleagues, Leon Cooper and Robert Schreifer. Together, they created the BCS theory of superconductivity. Superconductors make MRI machines work and levitating trains possible. When certain elements are brought near absolute zero, the superconducting material loses all resistance. The BCS theory was important enough to warrant a second Nobel Prize in physics. When he received the news of his first Nobel Prize, he dropped his scrambled eggs. The second was not such a shock. But there was something that mattered to John more than the prize itself. It was very important for Bardeen that his two young co-contributors would get the credit for their findings. Unlike Shockley, Bardeen was by all accounts a kind and modest man. He wasn't concerned with being the main face of the project. He just wanted to get along with his colleagues and make sure that everyone was recognized. He was authentic to himself. He was generous with his praises, and he constantly gave credit to his inspirations, his colleagues, and his students. After winning the second prize, Bardeen became an important advisor to Xerox and Sony. At Xerox, he contributed new ideas and consulted with researchers with considerable investment, often traveling to the Xerox labs by himself to give researchers advice. At Sony, he formed close relationships with George Hatoyama, Makoto Kikuchi, and Akio Morita. They hit it off so well that Sony gave over $3 million to create the John Bardeen Chair in Physics at UIUC. This was the largest single contribution ever given from a business to a university. The next 20 years of Bardeen's life were full of new creative projects that brought new ideas to the world of physics research. Throughout his life, he was exceptionally modest and unbelievably boring. John Bardeen has no epic quotes or crazy backstory where he had to overcome a giant barrier to becoming a scientist. He was always a smart kid and a hard worker, totally the type that could revolutionize computing and physics research, totally not the type that people make movies about. He wasn't a colorful character. He didn't make headlines like Einstein and Feynman. There wasn't any sort of special charisma that John had. I'd argue that most of us don't have that either. See, Bardeen didn't travel the world. He mostly lived in the Midwest and loved playing golf on the weekends. His greatest achievement was getting a hole-in-one. He wasn't the life of the party. His friends called him Silent John. In his free time, John often hosted cookout parties for his neighbors, many of whom had no idea what John had accomplished. John Bardeen is largely forgotten by popular culture. He is not Einstein. Bardeen did not stand out, nor did he try to. John Bardeen was an exceptionally normal Midwestern professor, and that is not enough to leave a mark on pop culture. People are not remembered for being important. They are remembered for being interesting. He liked his buns toasted. He was famous with his neighbors, not as a two-time Nobel Prize winner. He was famous for asking his guests if they wanted their buns toasted during his cookouts, because that's how he liked them. John Bardeen was honored and recognized as he deserved during his lifetime. At the end of the day, I think Bardeen didn't care about leaving a massive legacy or an interesting life story. John was a man who viewed the world not by what was interesting or most important, but by what he cared about. He made his career decisions based on what he wanted to do, not based on what would make him famous or interesting. By all accounts, he just didn't care about what other people thought of him. He happened to be a person who made two groundbreaking scientific discoveries. He was also a person who made hamburgers, and he made golf balls sink into artificial green cups. Okay, here's the closest thing I have to an interesting quote. At the end of his life, John Bardeen's friend asked him about what he was most proud of. His friend jokingly suggested that the Nobel Prizes and the hole-in-one were about the same. John Bardeen was not a joking man. After a moment of pause, Bardeen thoughtfully replied, "Perhaps that 2 Nobel Prizes is better than 1 hole-in-one." That's pretty boring. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.